Sometimes the people we abandon don't disappear, they just return when we least expect them. The crystal chandelier lights shimmered across the grand ballroom of the Sterling Grand Hotel while violins played softly somewhere near the marble staircase, and more than 300 wealthy guests raised champagne glasses to celebrate billionaire Ethan Crawford's engagement party. But at exactly 8:42 p.m., the entire room seemed to stop breathing when a silver serving tray slipped from trembling hands and shattered against the polished floor like a gunshot. Red wine splashed across white marble. Conversations died instantly. Ethan turned toward the sound with irritation already forming in his expression, expecting another nervous catering employee who couldn't handle pressure around Manhattan's elite. But then he saw her. Claire Bennett. His ex-wife. 8 months pregnant. Wearing a black waitress uniform 2 sizes too large, cheap non-slip shoes, and a silver name tag clipped crookedly against her chest. For one impossible second, Ethan Crawford forgot how to breathe. The violin music continued, but distant now, muffled beneath the roaring sound inside his head. Claire knelt slowly beside the broken glasses, one hand protecting her rounded stomach while the other shook violently as she tried gathering crystal shards into a napkin. Her blonde hair was tied back loosely, strands falling around her pale face, and even beneath the ballroom lights, Ethan could see exhaustion written into every movement she made. She looked thinner than he remembered. Fragile. Human. Not the woman who once stood beside him inside a freezing Brooklyn garage 6 years ago helping build his company from nothing more than 2 laptops and impossible dreams. Vanessa Sinclair's sharp laugh sliced through the silence. Seriously? She said loudly, staring down at the wine dripping near her designer heels. Can't your staff hire people who know how to carry a tray? Several guests exchanged uncomfortable glances. Claire lowered her eyes immediately. I'm sorry, ma'am, she whispered softly. Ethan felt something twist painfully in his chest because he recognized that voice. He remembered hearing it at 2 a.m. while Claire sat beside him drinking gas station coffee and fixing investor presentations after his employees quit. He remembered hearing it the night she sold her mother's diamond bracelets so Ethan could make payroll during the company's first year. And now that same voice sounded tired. Empty. Vanessa crossed her arms impatiently. Then clean it up before someone slips? Claire nodded quietly and crouched lower despite clearly struggling under the weight of her pregnancy. A nearby waiter moved like he wanted to help her, but one look from hotel management stopped him cold. Ethan remained frozen near the stage while his fiancée complained under her breath about incompetent staff, yet he barely heard her anymore because Claire's left hand suddenly became visible beneath the ballroom lights. The wedding ring was still there. Simple silver. Worn thin with time. Ethan's stomach dropped. She never took it off. Claire reached for another piece of broken glass when sudden dizziness hit her. Her shoulders swayed slightly. One of the caterers rushed beside her. Claire, you shouldn't even be working double shifts, the woman whispered nervously. Your doctor said you're high risk. Ethan's face lost all color. High risk. Pregnant. Working double shifts. His eyes slowly lowered toward Claire's stomach again, while a terrible realization began forming piece by piece inside his mind. Then Claire finally looked up. Their eyes met across the glittering ballroom for the first time in almost 2 years. And Ethan Crawford realized the woman he abandoned wasn't broken at all. She was hiding something. The air inside the ballroom suddenly felt too thin for Ethan Crawford to breathe properly. Claire stared at him only for a second before lowering her eyes again, but that single glance hit harder than any business loss or public scandal he had ever survived. Because buried beneath the exhaustion on her face was something he never expected to see again. Disappointment. Not anger. Not bitterness. Just disappointment. Vanessa stepped back from the spilled wine with visible disgust while guests whispered quietly behind raised champagne glasses. Somebody get this cleaned. Immediately. She snapped, adjusting the diamond bracelet around her wrist. This is exactly why cheap staff should never work luxury events. Claire swallowed softly and continued wiping the marble floor without responding. Ethan noticed how carefully she moved now, one hand always resting protectively near her stomach as though shielding the child from the world around her. Child. The word repeated in his mind like an alarm bell he could no longer silence. High-risk pregnancy. Double shifts. 8 months. Ethan felt sick. 2 years earlier Claire had disappeared from his life without warning only 3 weeks after signing their divorce papers. At the time he told himself she simply could not handle watching his success continue without her. Vanessa certainly reinforced that belief every chance she got. She was holding you back. Vanessa always said whenever Claire's name surfaced. Women like her resent ambitious men. Ethan believed it because believing that version hurt less than facing the truth. But now Claire stood 20 feet away wearing a catering uniform while carrying a baby that suddenly looked terrifyingly familiar to his own childhood photographs. Blonde hair. Gray eyes. The same nervous habit of touching her lower lip when anxious. Ethan's pulse quickened. Ethan? Vanessa's voice cut sharply into his thoughts. Are you even listening to me? He blinked slowly. What? Vanessa forced a smile for nearby investors while gripping his arm tighter than necessary. I asked if we should start the engagement speech before dessert. Ethan barely heard her. His attention remained locked on Claire as another server quietly helped her stand. The moment Claire rose to her feet, she winced slightly and pressed a hand against her back. A tiny movement. Most people would have missed it. Ethan did not. Because years ago Claire used to make that exact same face after working 16-hour days beside him inside their first office space near Queens. Back when success was not private jets and Manhattan penthouses. Back when success meant splitting one sandwich at midnight and praying investors answered emails. Ethan suddenly remembered the last real conversation they ever had. Rain hammered against their apartment windows while Claire sat at the kitchen table holding unopened medical paperwork in trembling hands. We need to talk, she had whispered that night. Ethan barely looked up from his laptop because Sterling Ventures was about to close its first major acquisition. Can it wait until tomorrow? He asked distractedly. Claire stared at him for several seconds before quietly nodding. Yes, she said softly. I guess it can. It never happened. 3 days later tabloids released photographs of Ethan and Vanessa leaving a charity gala together. The divorce lawyers arrived less than 2 months after that. Ethan had not thought about that night in almost 2 years. Until now. Until Claire stood pregnant beneath crystal chandeliers looking like a ghost from the life he abandoned. Sir? A nervous hotel manager approached Ethan carefully. Should we escort the employee out? Some guests are uncomfortable. Ethan looked toward Claire again just as she reached for an empty champagne tray. Their eyes met briefly. This time Ethan saw it clearly. She was terrified. Not of him. Of losing the job. Of causing another scene. Of surviving whatever life had become for her after he walked away. Something deep inside Ethan cracked quietly. No, he said immediately. The manager blinked. Excuse me? I said no. Ethan straightened slowly, voice colder now. She stays. Vanessa laughed awkwardly, assuming he was joking. Ethan, please do not tell me you are making a scene over a waitress. But Ethan never answered because movement near the ballroom entrance suddenly pulled everyone's attention away from the spilled wine and broken glasses. A tall man in a charcoal suit entered beside 2 security personnel, his polished shoes echoing softly across the marble floor. Adrian Cole. Billionaire investor. Tech giant. Ethan's biggest competitor. The whispers around the ballroom intensified instantly. Adrian rarely attended public events unless something important was happening. But what unsettled Ethan most was not Adrian's arrival. It was the direction he walked immediately after entering the room. Straight toward Claire. Adrian Cole moved through the ballroom with the calm confidence of a man who never rushed for anyone, yet the second his eyes landed on Claire Bennett, something in his expression changed almost imperceptibly. The conversations around the room faded into nervous whispers while camera flashes from socialites and business reporters lit the ballroom in brief bursts of white light. Ethan watched in complete disbelief as Adrian ignored investors worth hundreds of millions of dollars and walked directly toward the pregnant waitress standing beside a catering cart. Claire looked equally stunned. "Mr. Cole," she said softly, immediately lowering her eyes as though she had been caught doing something wrong. Adrian stopped in front of her, concern replacing the cold corporate mask he usually wore in public. "Claire," he said quietly, "why are you still working?" Ethan felt his chest tighten instantly. The familiarity in Adrian's voice was impossible to ignore. Vanessa noticed it too. Her polished smile faltered slightly as she looked between them. "Wait," Vanessa said carefully. "You know her?" Adrian finally looked up. His dark eyes moved across Ethan and Vanessa with the detached calm of a man evaluating strangers beneath him. "Yes," he answered simply. "I do." Claire shifted uncomfortably beside the catering station. "I told you I could handle tonight," she whispered. Adrian's jaw tightened slightly. "Your doctor disagreed." Ethan's stomach dropped again. Doctor. Adrian knew about her medical appointments. He knew about the pregnancy. He knew enough to sound personally involved. For one dangerous second, jealousy flared through Ethan so unexpectedly that it almost made him angry at himself. He had no right to feel jealous anymore. He was the one who left. The one who signed the divorce papers without even asking Claire to fight for the marriage. Yet watching another man speak to her with quiet concern felt unbearable. Vanessa stepped closer to Ethan immediately, sensing the emotional shift in the room. "This is ridiculous," she said with a strained laugh. "We are stopping our engagement party over a catering employee." Adrian's gaze moved toward her slowly. "A catering employee?" he repeated. The silence that followed made several nearby guests visibly uncomfortable. Vanessa crossed her arms defensively. "That is what she is tonight, correct?" Adrian looked back at Claire before answering. "No," he said calmly. "That is simply the disguise she chose." The ballroom seemed to freeze again. Ethan stared at Claire in confusion, while Vanessa laughed uncertainly. "What exactly is that supposed to mean?" she asked. Claire closed her eyes briefly as if bracing herself for what came next. Adrian reached into the inside pocket of his charcoal suit and removed a slim black envelope. "It means Miss Bennett has spent the last 4 months assisting a private internal investigation connected to Sterling Ventures Foundation." Ethan felt the blood drain from his face. "What?" Adrian handed the envelope directly to Ethan without looking away from him. "You should read page 6 first." Ethan opened the folder slowly while the ballroom buzzed with growing tension. Inside were printed financial records, transaction summaries, and offshore wire transfers connected to charitable donations from his foundation. At first the numbers looked normal. Then Ethan saw the account names. Cayman Holdings. False vendor payments. Shell companies tied to one executive's signature. Vanessa Sinclair? Ethan looked up sharply. Vanessa's confident expression flickered for the first time that evening. "Ethan, do not listen to this," she said immediately. "This is obviously some kind of setup." Adrian remained perfectly calm. "The evidence was verified by 3 separate forensic accounting firms." Ethan turned another page with trembling hands. More transactions. Larger numbers. Millions of dollars redirected over nearly 18 months. "That is impossible," Ethan whispered. Claire finally spoke again, her voice quiet but steady. "I thought it was impossible too." Ethan looked at her in stunned silence. Claire swallowed carefully before continuing. "At first I only noticed small inconsistencies in the foundation reports. Missing invoices. Duplicate transfers. Vendor names that did not exist." Vanessa shook her head sharply. "She is lying." Claire ignored her completely. "I started investigating after one of the scholarship programs was suddenly cancelled last winter." Her eyes lowered briefly. "You promised those kids funding for 4 years." Ethan remembered the meeting instantly. Vanessa blamed market instability for the cuts. Ethan approved the decision without reviewing the numbers personally. Guilt hit him like ice water. Claire continued softly. The money was never lost in the market. It was moved. Several guests had stopped pretending not to listen anymore. Investors exchanged uneasy glances while reporters quietly reached for phones beneath cocktail tables. Vanessa's voice sharpened with panic. This is insane. Ethan, she is doing this because she wants revenge. Ethan looked at Claire again. Revenge. But revenge was not what he saw standing in front of him. Claire looked exhausted. Pale. Hurt. Yet somehow still trying to protect the very company that destroyed her marriage. Why? Ethan asked quietly before he could stop himself. Claire blinked at him. Why what? Why would you help me after everything? For the first time all evening, genuine emotion cracked through Claire's composure. She looked away toward the ballroom windows where Manhattan lights shimmered against the dark glass. Because once upon a time, she said softly, that company was our dream. Ethan could not speak. Memory after memory crashed through his mind all at once. Claire asleep beside financial spreadsheets at 3 in the morning. Claire practicing investor pitches with him inside a tiny apartment kitchen. Claire smiling through exhaustion while promising they would survive one more month. He remembered every sacrifice now with horrifying clarity. And suddenly he realized something even worse. Claire never fought him during the divorce. She never demanded part ownership. Never exposed the intellectual property agreements she helped write during the company's earliest years. She simply walked away. Ethan slowly looked back at the documents in his hands. How long have you known? He asked Adrian quietly. Long enough to know your foundation was being dismantled from the inside. Adrian replied. But not long enough to stop the damage entirely. Vanessa stepped backward slightly, her composure beginning to collapse beneath dozens of watching eyes. This is not happening, she whispered. Ethan barely heard her. His attention remained fixed on Claire as another realization formed inside his mind. You said 4 months, he said slowly. You have been working on this investigation for 4 months? Claire nodded once. Ethan stared at her stomach again. 4 months ago she was already pregnant. Working double shifts while secretly investigating financial crimes tied to his company. The shame nearly crushed him. Why did you not tell me? He asked hoarsely. Claire looked at him carefully this time, and the sadness in her eyes felt unbearable. Would you have listened? Ethan opened his mouth but no words came out because deep down he already knew the answer. No. He would not have listened. Not while Vanessa controlled every meeting, every schedule, every explanation around him. Not while he convinced himself success mattered more than the woman who helped him build it. A sudden wave of dizziness hit Claire then. She reached for the edge of the catering cart immediately. Adrian moved beside her at once. Sit down, he said firmly. I am fine, Claire whispered. But she was clearly not fine. Her face had gone almost completely white beneath the ballroom lights. Ethan took a step forward instinctively, but Claire flinched the second he moved closer. That tiny reaction hurt more than any accusation could have. Because once upon a time Claire ran toward him whenever she was afraid. Now she instinctively pulled away. Adrian guided her carefully toward a nearby chair while the ballroom watched in complete silence. One of the catering staff rushed over with water. Claire accepted it with shaking hands. Ethan noticed then how worn out her fingers looked. Dry skin. Tiny cuts near her knuckles. Working hands. Not the hands of the woman who once attended charity galas beside him wearing custom gowns and diamond earrings. Vanessa suddenly grabbed Ethan's arm tightly enough to break his thoughts. You cannot seriously believe this, she hissed under her breath. Ethan slowly looked at her. For the first time in nearly 2 years, he truly saw Vanessa Sinclair clearly. The perfect image. The polished smile. The constant need for control. And beneath it all something colder. Fear. Did you steal from the foundation? Ethan asked quietly. Vanessa's eyes widened. Ethan, answer me. She forced a laugh again, but it sounded brittle now. Of course not. This woman is manipulating you. Ethan glanced toward Claire sitting weakly beside the ballroom wall, while protecting her stomach with one trembling hand. Manipulating him? No. Claire never manipulated anyone. That was part of the reason she lost everything in the first place. Adrian looked toward Ethan evenly. There is more, he said. Ethan frowned. More? Adrian nodded once. The offshore accounts were not the only thing Claire uncovered. Before Ethan could ask another question, the giant LED screen above the ballroom stage suddenly flickered once. Then twice. Conversation stopped instantly. The romantic slideshow prepared for Ethan and Vanessa's engagement vanished from the screen completely, replaced instead by a black file directory labeled Internal Transfers. Vanessa's face lost all color. The giant ballroom screen flickered again, washing the marble walls in cold blue light, while confused guests slowly turned away from their champagne glasses and toward the stage. Ethan Crawford stared upward in disbelief as lines of transaction records began appearing across the 20-foot display one after another. Offshore transfers. Duplicate invoices. Fake humanitarian projects. The room filled with nervous whispers almost instantly. Vanessa stepped backward so quickly her heel nearly slipped against the polished floor. Turn that off, she snapped toward the event staff. Turn it off right now. But nobody moved. Because at the bottom corner of the screen, a new line suddenly appeared in bold white letters. Authorized by Vanessa Sinclair. Ethan felt his pulse pounding violently against his throat. More files loaded automatically. Timestamps. Private account numbers. Secret agreements connected to shell corporations overseas. Some of the investors near the front tables began checking their phones immediately while reporters quietly started recording video beneath the tablecloths. Vanessa forced herself to smile despite the panic rising behind her eyes. This is fabricated, she said sharply. Somebody hacked the system. Adrian Cole folded his hands calmly in front of him. Actually, he said, the files were uploaded from your personal assistant's company laptop approximately 14 minutes ago. Vanessa's expression cracked. Just for a second. But Ethan saw it. And once he saw it, he could not unsee everything else. The late-night business trips. The sudden changes in financial reports. The cancelled scholarship programs. The pressure Vanessa constantly placed on him to stop reviewing details personally. Ethan slowly looked back toward Claire sitting quietly near the ballroom wall, while one trembling hand rested protectively over her stomach. She looked exhausted beneath the chandelier lights, but she never once looked satisfied. That was what destroyed him most. Claire was not enjoying this. She looked heartbroken. Why are you doing this here? Ethan asked quietly. Claire raised tired eyes toward him. Because if I brought this to your office, she said softly, Vanessa would have buried it before you ever saw the truth. Silence spread through the ballroom again. Ethan remembered every moment over the last 2 years when Claire tried to contact him after the divorce. Small things at first. Emails forwarded through legal assistants. Requests to discuss foundation records. Questions about missing charity funds. Vanessa always dismissed them before they reached him. She is obsessed, Vanessa used to say casually while deleting the messages herself. Ethan believed her every single time. The shame settled deeper into his chest like wet concrete. Suddenly another file appeared on the ballroom screen. This one was different. A photograph. Ethan froze immediately. It was an old picture taken inside their first office in Brooklyn nearly 6 years earlier. Claire sat cross-legged on the floor wearing one of Ethan's oversized sweatshirts, while smiling at a laptop balanced on her knees. Ethan himself stood behind her holding 2 cups of coffee, and looking happier than he had felt in years. Beneath the photo was a legal incorporation document dated 8 months before Sterling Ventures officially launched. Primary software architect Claire Bennett. Ethan blinked hard. No, he whispered under his breath. Adrian finally looked toward him directly. Yes. More pages followed across the screen. Patent drafts. Original coding structures. Early investment proposals written almost entirely in Claire's handwriting. Several guests gasped softly as the truth unfolded piece by piece beneath the ballroom lights. Claire had not simply supported the company. She helped build it. Ethan suddenly remembered dozens of nights when Claire stayed awake rewriting system models while he handled investor calls. Back then he promised her they were a team. But somewhere along the road between success and ambition, he let the world convince him she was just the wife standing beside the founder. Vanessa stepped toward Ethan desperately now. "You cannot actually believe this," she whispered harshly. "Everybody knows she stayed home while you built the company." Claire lowered her eyes quietly. Ethan noticed that tiny movement too. Like she was already used to her sacrifices being erased. Adrian's voice remained calm. "Claire Bennett wrote nearly 60% of Sterling Ventures' original financial optimization framework." He paused briefly. "The same framework your company still uses today." Several investors exchanged shocked looks immediately. Ethan felt physically sick. He remembered the night Claire showed him the first prototype algorithm inside their apartment kitchen while rain hammered against the windows outside. She laughed nervously when explaining it because she never believed she was the smartest person in the room even when she usually was. "It probably needs work," she said back then while pushing loose blonde hair behind her ear. Ethan kissed her forehead and told her someday the world would know her name too. But the world never learned her name. Only his. Claire shifted uncomfortably in her chair again, one hand pressing gently against her lower stomach now. Adrian noticed immediately. "You need to rest," he told her quietly. "I just need a minute," Claire whispered. Ethan instinctively stepped closer. "Claire!" But before he could finish speaking, she suddenly inhaled sharply and gripped the edge of the chair harder. Fear flashed across Ethan's face instantly. "What is wrong?" he asked. Claire forced a weak smile that did not reach her eyes. "Nothing," she whispered. "The baby just moves a lot when I am stressed." Baby. The word landed differently now. Not abstract anymore. Not distant. Real. Ethan stared at her stomach again, while memories began rearranging themselves inside his head with terrifying clarity. The cancelled dinner 2 years ago. The unopened medical envelope Claire held in the kitchen. The way she disappeared completely right after the divorce finalized. Ethan's breathing slowed painfully. "Claire," he said quietly, "when exactly did you find out you were pregnant?" Claire looked at him for several long seconds before answering. 3 days before the divorce hearing." Ethan closed his eyes. Vanessa immediately interrupted. "Ethan, do not let her manipulate you with this now." But Ethan barely heard her anymore because Claire's next words shattered whatever remained of his composure. "I almost told you," she whispered softly. "I drove to your penthouse that night." Ethan opened his eyes immediately. Claire stared toward the ballroom floor while speaking carefully, almost like revisiting the memory physically hurt. "But when I got there, I saw photographers outside the building." Her voice trembled slightly for the first time all evening. "You and Vanessa were celebrating your acquisition deal together." Ethan remembered that night perfectly now. The champagne. The cameras. Vanessa kissing him outside the lobby while reporters shouted questions. Claire swallowed hard before continuing. "You looked happy," she whispered. "So I turned around and left." Ethan felt something inside him collapse completely. Around them the ballroom remained silent except for the low hum of the giant LED screen still displaying transaction files across the walls like evidence inside a courtroom. But none of it mattered anymore because Ethan Crawford finally understood the full cost of the life he chose. And across the ballroom, hidden among the frozen spreadsheets and offshore account numbers, one final file suddenly opened automatically. This time it was not financial records. It was a medical document. The ballroom lights suddenly felt colder as the medical file expanded across the giant LED screen above the stage. Conversation stopped completely. Even the violinists near the marble staircase lowered their instruments in confusion, while guests stared upward in silence. Ethan Crawford felt his heartbeat slow into something heavy and terrifying as he read the first line appearing beneath Claire Bennett's name. High-risk pregnancy. Recommended reduced physical activity. Stress may cause complications. Ethan's fingers tightened around the black folder Adrian had handed him earlier. Claire immediately looked horrified. No, she whispered softly, struggling to stand. That was not supposed to be uploaded. Adrian frowned sharply toward the technical booth across the ballroom. Somebody accessed the wrong drive. Vanessa moved quickly then, panic finally replacing her polished composure completely. Shut it off! She snapped at the event staff again. Now. But nobody obeyed because another page loaded automatically. Ultrasound images appeared beneath the medical report. Tiny hands. Tiny feet. A heartbeat chart running across the bottom corner of the screen. Ethan stopped breathing entirely. For one impossible second the entire ballroom disappeared around him. No investors. No cameras. No engagement party. Only the image of a child that should have known his voice long before tonight. Claire lowered her head immediately, tears finally burning behind her eyes despite every effort to remain composed. I did not want this public, she whispered. Ethan barely heard her. His eyes remained fixed on the ultrasound images while guilt spread through him with almost physical weight. He remembered how badly Claire once wanted children. Back when they still lived inside a 600-square-foot apartment in Brooklyn, she used to stop outside toy stores during winter walks and smile at tiny baby clothes behind the glass. Ethan always promised her there would be time later. After the company stabilized. After the next funding round. After success finally stopped demanding everything from them. But success never stopped asking for more. And somewhere along the way Ethan stopped noticing how lonely Claire became standing beside him. A new line appeared beneath the ultrasound scans. Emergency contact, none provided. Ethan felt sick instantly. No emergency contact. No husband. No family listed. Just Claire alone navigating doctor's appointments and long work shifts while carrying his child. Why was there no emergency contact? He asked quietly before he could stop himself. Claire wiped quickly beneath her eyes and forced herself to stay calm. Because I did not want anyone calling you, she answered honestly. The words landed harder than public humiliation ever could. Ethan stared at her in complete silence while memories continued tearing through him one after another. Missed dinners. Ignored calls. Nights Claire waited awake while he attended events with Vanessa long before the divorce officially ended. He used to tell himself Claire understood the pressure of building an empire. But now he realized something far worse. She understood it so well that she sacrificed herself to protect his dream even after he stopped protecting her. Vanessa stepped beside Ethan again, voice low and urgent now. You cannot seriously let her manipulate you with a pregnancy, she hissed. Ethan turned slowly toward her. Something dangerous had changed inside his eyes. Manipulate me? He repeated quietly. Vanessa immediately softened her tone after realizing too late how cruel the sentence sounded in a silent ballroom. That is not what I meant. But Ethan barely listened anymore because another file had appeared on the screen. Hospital billing statements. Late payment notices. Medical debt reminders. Claire closed her eyes immediately when she saw them. Ethan read the numbers once. Then twice. Nearly $80,000 in overdue medical expenses. His stomach twisted violently. $80,000. While he spent more than that on floral arrangements for tonight's engagement party alone. Ethan looked toward Claire again, noticing details he should have recognized earlier. The loose uniform hiding weight loss. The exhaustion in her posture. The way she instinctively protected every dollar by apologizing even when she was the one being humiliated. Adrian's voice remained calm beside him. She refused financial assistance multiple times. Ethan looked sharply toward him. You offered to help her? Adrian nodded once. Many times. Claire looked embarrassed now. I could handle it, she whispered weakly. Adrian's expression softened slightly. You were never very good at asking for help. Ethan felt jealousy flare again unexpectedly. Adrian knew these things about her now. Not him. Another man knew what medications she needed. Which doctor she saw. How often she skipped meals to cover medical bills. Ethan realized with growing horror that he no longer knew the woman he once promised to love for the rest of his life. Across the ballroom, several reporters quietly slipped toward the exits while typing furiously into phones. The scandal would hit every financial news outlet in Manhattan before midnight. Ethan should have cared. A few hours ago, protecting Sterling Ventures' public image would have been his highest priority. But now none of it seemed important compared to the exhausted pregnant woman sitting beneath the ballroom lights, trying desperately not to fall apart in front of strangers. Claire suddenly inhaled sharply again and pressed her hand lower against her stomach. Adrian crouched beside her immediately. "Claire?" She forced a tiny smile that looked painfully fragile. "It is okay," she whispered. "She just kicks harder when I am stressed." Ethan froze. She. A daughter. His daughter. The realization hit him so hard he had to steady himself against the edge of a nearby table. Claire noticed his reaction immediately and looked away before he could speak. Almost as though seeing hope in his eyes now would hurt too much after everything else. Ethan swallowed hard. "You are having a girl?" Claire nodded once silently. Something inside Ethan completely unraveled. He imagined tiny fingers wrapped around Claire's hand during doctor visits he never attended. Tiny heartbeats he never heard. Tiny moments already lost forever. Before he even knew they existed. Vanessa suddenly stepped forward again, desperation replacing arrogance now. "Ethan, everybody is watching," she whispered harshly. "You need to control this situation." Ethan slowly looked around the ballroom. Investors whispering nervously. Cameras recording. Socialites pretending not to stare while absorbing every second of the disaster unfolding beneath the chandeliers. But then his eyes returned to Claire sitting alone beside a catering cart, while protecting the child he never knew existed. And for the first time in years, Ethan Crawford understood exactly what the real disaster was. For several long seconds Ethan Crawford stood completely motionless beneath the ballroom chandeliers while the truth dismantled the life he thought he controlled. The giant LED screen still glowed behind him with unpaid hospital bills and ultrasound scans, but now none of the wealthy guests looked impressed by the engagement decorations or million-dollar flower arrangements anymore. They were watching Claire Bennett. The pregnant woman in a catering uniform who somehow carried more dignity sitting quietly beside a service cart than anyone else in the room. Claire lowered her eyes again, visibly uncomfortable beneath hundreds of stares. Ethan noticed immediately how her fingers trembled around the paper cup of water someone handed her. She was exhausted. Not dramatic. Not vindictive. Just exhausted. And somehow that hurt him more than anger ever could. Vanessa suddenly stepped directly in front of the ballroom screen, trying desperately to reclaim control of the night. "This entire thing is inappropriate," she announced loudly, forcing confidence back into her voice. "Private medical records should never be displayed publicly." Adrian Cole looked at her calmly. "I agree." Vanessa blinked, surprised. Adrian continued evenly. "Which is why somebody intentionally uploaded those files after realizing the financial evidence alone was enough to expose them." Silence crashed across the ballroom again. Ethan slowly turned toward Vanessa. She immediately shook her head. "No, you had access to the event server," Adrian said quietly. "And you panicked." Vanessa laughed nervously. "This is insane." But her voice sounded thinner now. Weaker. Claire finally looked up again, her pale face tightening with guilt. "I never wanted any of this public," she whispered. Ethan believed her instantly because he remembered who Claire used to be before the world hardened around her. She hated attention. Hated conflict. Even during the divorce she refused interviews despite tabloids offering ridiculous amounts of money for her story. "Then why stay?" Ethan asked quietly before thinking. Claire looked confused. "What? Why stay tonight?" His voice lowered further. "After everything, why not walk away from me completely?" Claire stared at him silently for a moment, while distant city lights reflected against the ballroom windows behind her. Then she gave the smallest, saddest smile he had ever seen. Because I knew someday you would finally look up long enough to see what was happening around you. Ethan felt those words physically. Adrian glanced briefly toward Claire before speaking again. She tried to warn you for almost a year. Ethan frowned sharply. What? Adrian folded his hands calmly. Anonymous reports sent to your office. Audit requests. Internal compliance complaints. Ethan's stomach tightened. He remembered all of them now. Vanessa always handled those files personally before they reached him. You told me those reports came from jealous employees, Ethan said slowly while looking toward Vanessa. Vanessa's composure cracked again. Because that is what they were. Adrian tilted his head slightly. Interesting, he said calmly. Considering several of those complaints came directly from Claire. Ethan felt the room spin slightly. Claire lowered her eyes again, embarrassed by the attention. I stopped signing my name after the third time nobody answered, she admitted softly. Ethan could barely process the weight of it. She kept trying to protect the company even after he destroyed their marriage. Even while pregnant. Even while working herself beyond exhaustion just to survive. Vanessa grabbed Ethan's arm suddenly. Do not do this, she whispered urgently. Do not let them manipulate you emotionally in front of investors. Ethan slowly looked down at her hand, gripping his sleeve. Once upon a time, Vanessa's confidence attracted him because it felt exciting beside the chaos of rapid success. But tonight it suddenly felt cold. Transactional. Empty. Claire never held on to him like that. Claire used to believe he would choose her willingly. The realization hollowed him out. Did you know? Ethan asked quietly without looking away from Vanessa. Know what? That Claire was pregnant when the divorce finalized. Vanessa froze. It lasted less than a second, but Ethan saw it clearly. And that was enough. Ethan stepped backward slowly as understanding settled across his face like a storm finally reaching shore. You knew, he whispered. Vanessa immediately shook her head. Ethan, listen to me, you knew. Her expression hardened defensively now that denial no longer worked. She told me not to say anything. Claire's eyes widened instantly. That is not true. Vanessa turned toward her sharply. You showed up at the penthouse crying with medical paperwork in your hand. Ethan's breathing stopped. Claire looked stunned for a moment before realization crossed her face. You answered the door, she whispered. Vanessa crossed her arms tightly. And you looked pathetic. Ethan stared at Claire in disbelief. You came to see me? Claire swallowed hard. I never made it upstairs. The ballroom remained completely silent except for the low electrical hum from the giant screen overhead. Vanessa rolled her eyes impatiently. Please. She stood outside the building crying while photographers waited everywhere. I was protecting you from a scandal. Ethan looked at her slowly now, like seeing a stranger standing in front of him for the first time. Protecting me? Vanessa exhaled sharply. Your company was exploding internationally. Investors were watching every move you made. The last thing you needed was a messy emotional situation with your ex-wife suddenly claiming she was pregnant. Claire looked physically hurt by the sentence. Ethan noticed immediately. He also noticed something else. Adrian moved slightly closer to Claire the moment her expression changed, subtle and protective. Without touching her. Ethan hated how much that detail burned. So you sent her away, Ethan said quietly. Vanessa lifted her chin defensively. I did what was necessary. Ethan stared at her in complete silence while pieces of the last 2 years rearranged themselves into something ugly and undeniable. The missing messages. The blocked emails. The unexplained hostility whenever Claire's name appeared. Vanessa did not simply replace Claire. She erased her. Claire suddenly pressed a trembling hand against her stomach again and inhaled sharply. Ethan moved instinctively toward her this time before stopping himself halfway. Claire noticed the hesitation immediately. Adrian crouched beside her. Claire? She closed her eyes briefly. I think I just need air. Ethan's heart dropped instantly. Should we call a doctor? Claire shook her head quickly. No hospitals, she whispered. I cannot afford another overnight bill. That sentence destroyed whatever remained of Ethan Crawford's emotional control. Because for the first time in his billionaire life, standing beneath crystal chandeliers surrounded by wealth and cameras and power, he realized the woman he once promised to protect had been surviving completely alone while carrying his daughter. The words echoed through Ethan Crawford's mind long after Claire said them. I cannot afford another overnight bill. Around them the ballroom still glittered with imported flowers, diamond jewelry, and crystal chandeliers worth more than most families earn in years, yet somehow the richest man in the room suddenly felt painfully poor. Claire tried to stand slowly beside the catering cart, but the moment she pushed herself upright, dizziness hit her again. Adrian steadied her immediately with one careful hand near her elbow. Ethan noticed how gently he treated her, like someone handling something precious that had already been damaged too many times by the world. You should sit back down, Adrian said quietly. Claire shook her head stubbornly. I still have tables to clear before the dessert service. Ethan stared at her in disbelief. Claire, he said softly, why are you still worried about work right now? Claire looked genuinely confused by the question. Because I need the money. The simplicity of the answer destroyed him. Ethan remembered the woman who once argued with investors twice her age while wearing sneakers inside conference rooms because they could not afford proper business clothes yet. Claire never feared hard work. But seeing her forced into survival after helping build an empire worth billions made Ethan feel physically ill. Vanessa suddenly stepped forward again, desperation now bleeding openly through her polished voice. This is becoming embarrassing for everyone involved, she announced loudly enough for nearby guests to hear. Perhaps we should handle personal matters privately instead of turning my engagement party into some emotional spectacle. Ethan turned toward her slowly. Your engagement party? Vanessa blinked at the coldness in his tone. Ethan, you forged charity reports. I explained that already. You hid my ex-wife's pregnancy from me. Vanessa crossed her arms defensively. I protected your reputation. Ethan laughed quietly then, but there was no humor in the sound. Only exhaustion. No, he said. You protected your position. Silence settled heavily around them again. Several investors near the ballroom entrance were already leaving quietly, unwilling to be photographed near a growing corporate scandal. Reporters lingered near the walls pretending to check phones while recording every second. Somewhere near the stage, the violinist stopped playing completely. Claire lowered her eyes as though wishing she could disappear from the center of the disaster unfolding around her. Ethan noticed immediately. He remembered that look too. Claire always folded inward when rooms became cruel. Years ago, after his first magazine interview, reporters mocked her simple black dress online because she did not look like a billionaire founder's wife. Ethan promised her he would shield her from that kind of humiliation. But tonight she stood in front of Manhattan's elite wearing a catering uniform while strangers whispered about her medical bills. And somehow she still carried herself with more grace than anyone else in the room. Adrian looked toward Ethan evenly. The board already knows. Ethan frowned sharply. What? The financial evidence was delivered to Sterling Ventures directors 3 hours ago. Ethan stared at him in shock. Adrian continued calmly. Several emergency meetings are already scheduled for tomorrow morning. Vanessa's face went pale again. You went behind our backs? Adrian's expression never changed. I went around corruption. Ethan slowly looked toward the giant ballroom screen still glowing above them. His empire was collapsing in real time. Investors were leaving. News outlets were already publishing headlines. By morning his stock would probably crash. Yet none of it frightened him as much as the thought of Claire leaving this room forever before he could fix even a fraction of what he destroyed. Claire, Ethan said quietly. She looked up carefully. I need to ask you something. Her fingers tightened around the paper cup. Okay. Ethan swallowed hard. If I had known about the baby. His voice cracked slightly for the first time all evening. Would you have stayed? The question hung in the ballroom like fragile glass. Claire looked at him silently for several long seconds while city lights shimmered against the windows behind her. Then she gave a sad little shake of her head. Ethan felt his chest cave inward instantly. Claire's voice remained soft when she finally answered. "I would have hoped you stayed because you loved me," she whispered. "Not because I was pregnant." Ethan closed his eyes briefly because there was no defense against that truth. Vanessa suddenly scoffed under her breath. "This is unbelievable." Adrian's gaze shifted toward her immediately. "You should probably stop speaking." Vanessa ignored him completely and looked directly at Claire instead. "You really expect everyone here to believe you are innocent?" Claire blinked in surprise. Vanessa stepped closer, her composure finally cracking into bitterness. "You disappeared for 2 years and suddenly come back the exact night of my engagement party carrying a billionaire's baby and secret investigation files?" Several guests exchanged uncomfortable glances. Claire looked wounded but remained calm. "I did not choose tonight," she said quietly. "The audit did." Vanessa laughed sharply. "Please. You knew exactly what you were doing." Ethan's expression darkened instantly. "Enough." Vanessa looked stunned by the force in his voice. Ethan rarely raised his tone publicly. "She spent 2 years surviving alone while I celebrated myself in magazines and interviews," he said coldly. "So do not stand there pretending she is the villain in this story." The ballroom went completely silent again. Claire looked shocked too. Ethan realized then that she probably had not heard him defend her once in years. And maybe she stopped expecting him to. The thought hurt more than he could explain. Suddenly Claire inhaled sharply again and gripped the edge of the chair beside her. This time the movement looked different. More painful. Adrian immediately crouched beside her. "Claire?" She pressed trembling fingers against her stomach while trying to steady her breathing. "I think..." She stopped speaking briefly and closed her eyes. Ethan felt panic surge through him instantly. "What is happening?" Claire looked terrified now despite trying to stay composed. "I am not sure," she whispered. Adrian looked toward Ethan sharply. "She needs a doctor." Claire shook her head quickly. "No hospitals." "Claire, I cannot afford." Ethan dropped to one knee in front of her before she could finish the sentence. The movement stunned the entire ballroom. Billionaire Ethan Crawford kneeling on marble floors beside a pregnant waitress while camera flashes exploded across the room. But Ethan did not care anymore. He looked directly into Claire's frightened eyes for the first time all night. "You will never worry about another hospital bill again," he said quietly. Claire stared at him speechlessly. And before anyone could react further, the ballroom entrance doors suddenly opened again. This time it was not investors walking in. It was Sterling Ventures' corporate legal counsel. The ballroom doors swung open with a sharp metallic echo that cut through the silence like a warning shot. Every head turned instantly as 3 men in dark suits entered carrying silver briefcases and stacks of legal folders beneath their arms. Ethan Crawford recognized them immediately. Sterling Ventures' corporate counsel. His lead attorney, Daniel Mercer, moved faster than Ethan had ever seen him move before. "Ethan," Daniel said breathlessly, stopping near the ballroom stage. "We have a serious problem." Ethan was still kneeling beside Claire when he answered quietly. "I already know." Daniel glanced toward the giant LED screen glowing with offshore account records and unpaid medical bills. His face tightened immediately. "The Securities Commission has been notified." Vanessa's expression collapsed completely. "What?" Daniel continued quickly. "Several board members initiated an emergency internal review 30 minutes ago after receiving anonymous evidence connected to the foundation accounts." Adrian folded his arms calmly nearby. "Not anonymous," he corrected softly. "Verified." Ethan slowly stood to his feet beside Claire while the ballroom watched every movement like a courtroom audience waiting for a verdict. "How bad is it?" Ethan asked quietly. Daniel hesitated. That alone terrified Ethan because Daniel Mercer never hesitated. "Potential fraud investigations," Daniel admitted carefully. "Misuse of nonprofit funds. Tax violations connected to international transfers." Vanessa stepped backward immediately. "No," she whispered. "That is impossible." Daniel looked directly at her now. "Federal investigators are already requesting financial access logs." The room erupted into whispers again. Several investors who had stayed silent until now immediately walked toward the exits while checking phones and speaking urgently to assistants. Camera flashes exploded across the ballroom. Claire lowered her head again, visibly overwhelmed by the chaos surrounding her. Ethan noticed immediately. Even now she looked more worried about everyone else than herself. "We should leave," Adrian told Claire quietly. Claire nodded weakly, but the moment she tried standing again, pain crossed her face fast enough to send panic through Ethan instantly. "Claire?" Ethan moved beside her immediately. She closed her eyes briefly and steadied her breathing with visible effort. "I am okay," she whispered. Automatically. Ethan almost broke hearing that because Claire always said she was okay even when she clearly was not. During the early startup years, she once worked 36 straight hours debugging a software collapse while running a fever and smiling through exhaustion because she did not want Ethan distracted before investor meetings. He used to admire that strength. Tonight he hated himself for relying on it. Adrian looked toward Ethan sharply. "She needs a doctor now." Claire immediately shook her head again. "No hospitals." Ethan crouched slightly beside her chair. "Claire, please stop worrying about money." She looked up at him then with eyes full of exhaustion and old heartbreak. "You do not understand what it feels like to owe everything," she whispered. Ethan's throat tightened painfully because she was right. Somewhere along the way he forgot what survival actually felt like. He forgot because success insulated him from fear while Claire carried all of it alone. Vanessa suddenly stepped forward again, desperation now turning reckless. "Ethan, you cannot seriously stand there acting like she is the victim while our company collapses around us." Ethan looked at her slowly. "Our company?" Vanessa's face hardened. "You think investors care about emotional stories right now? We need damage control immediately." Claire flinched slightly at the sentence. Ethan noticed instantly. "Enough," he said coldly. Vanessa stared at him in disbelief. "Excuse me?" Ethan's voice lowered dangerously. "You manipulated my company, isolated my wife, hid my child from me, and somehow you still think this night is about your image." The ballroom went completely silent again. Wife. Ethan had not called Claire that in over 2 years. Claire looked stunned too. Vanessa laughed bitterly. "Your wife?" she repeated sharply. "You divorced her." Ethan's jaw tightened. "That does not erase what she meant to me." Claire looked down immediately, emotion flickering across her exhausted face before she quickly hid it again. Adrian noticed too. Ethan hated that Adrian noticed everything about her now. Daniel Mercer stepped closer carefully. "Ethan, we need to discuss immediate legal strategy before this situation gets worse publicly." Ethan glanced toward the ballroom exits where reporters were already gathering beyond the glass doors like sharks sensing blood in the water. By sunrise, every business network in America would be talking about Sterling Ventures. But strangely, none of that mattered anymore. Because standing beside Claire now, Ethan realized success without her felt hollow in a way no amount of money could fix. Suddenly Claire inhaled sharply again and grabbed Ethan's sleeve instinctively. The tiny movement froze him completely because it was the first time she reached for him all night. "Claire?" Ethan asked immediately. Her breathing had changed now. Shorter. More strained. Adrian crouched beside her quickly. "How far apart?" Claire swallowed hard. "About 10 minutes. Ethan frowned in confusion. Adrian looked up sharply. Contractions. Ethan's entire body went cold. Claire closed her eyes briefly, embarrassed by the attention now turning toward her again. "I did not think it was real labor yet," she whispered softly. Panic exploded through Ethan instantly. "We are going to the hospital." Claire shook her head weakly. "Ethan, no." His voice cracked with emotion for the first time publicly. "No more waiting. No more doing this alone. The ballroom watched in complete silence as Ethan Crawford removed his custom tuxedo jacket and carefully wrapped it around Claire's shoulders like she was something precious the world had already damaged too much. Claire looked stunned by the gesture. Ethan knelt beside her again, his voice softer now. "I missed every doctor appointment," he whispered painfully. "I missed hearing her heartbeat. I missed all of it." Claire's eyes filled with tears immediately. Ethan swallowed hard before continuing. "Please do not make me miss this too." For one fragile second Claire looked at him the way she used to years ago before the money and betrayal and loneliness shattered everything between them. Vulnerable. Hopeful. Terrified. Then another contraction hit, and Claire instinctively gripped Ethan's hand tightly enough to stop his breathing. Across the ballroom, camera flashes exploded again while investors whispered and reporters recorded every second. But Ethan Crawford no longer cared about headlines or stock prices or scandals. Because at that moment the only thing that mattered in the entire world was the frightened woman holding his hand beneath crystal chandeliers while carrying the daughter he almost lost without ever knowing her. Rain hammered against the windows of St. Matthew Medical Center just after midnight, while reporters crowded behind barricades outside the emergency entrance waiting for any glimpse of Ethan Crawford or the collapsing empire attached to his name. Inside the hospital, everything smelled like antiseptic, exhaustion, and second chances. Ethan sat alone in the maternity waiting area, still wearing the same black dress shirt from the engagement party, sleeves rolled unevenly, tie missing, dried drops of spilled wine still staining one cuff near his wrist. The billionaire who once controlled entire boardrooms with a single sentence now looked like a man barely holding himself together. Across the hallway, hospital staff moved quickly beneath fluorescent lights while distant monitor sounds echoed softly through the corridor. Ethan stared at the floor without moving because every few minutes he replayed the same memory inside his head. Claire standing alone outside his penthouse 2 years ago carrying medical paperwork, while Vanessa sent her away before she could even reach the elevator. The thought hollowed him out from the inside. Adrian Cole leaned quietly against the wall nearby holding 2 untouched cups of coffee. Neither man had spoken much since arriving at the hospital. There was nothing left to compete over anymore. Not tonight. Not after seeing Claire trembling beneath ballroom lights while apologizing for hospital bills she should never have faced alone. Ethan finally looked up after nearly 20 minutes of silence. "Why did you help her?" Adrian answered honestly. "Because she deserved help." Ethan nodded slowly. No ego. No hidden agenda. Just truth. Adrian glanced toward the delivery room doors before speaking again. "You know she still defended you." Ethan frowned weakly. "What?" Adrian folded his arms calmly. "Even after everything." Ethan stared at him silently. Adrian continued. "When the investigation uncovered the missing funds, the board wanted immediate criminal accusations connected to executive negligence." He paused briefly. Claire stopped them. Ethan felt his throat tighten. "Why?" Adrian gave a faint humorless smile. Her exact words were, "Ethan trusted the wrong people. But he built that company believing it could help people. Do not destroy the good part of him because of the worst mistake he ever made." Ethan closed his eyes immediately. Shame crashed through him so hard he could barely breathe. Claire still believed there was good left inside him after he abandoned her. After he failed her. After he never even noticed she was carrying his child. A nurse suddenly pushed through the maternity doors carrying paperwork. Ethan stood instantly. "How is she?" The nurse smiled gently. "She is stable. The contractions slowed after medication." Ethan nearly collapsed from relief. "And the baby?" "Healthy heartbeat." Ethan covered his face briefly with trembling hands because nobody should feel this grateful simply hearing their child was okay, yet somehow it felt like the first truly meaningful thing he had heard in years. The nurse glanced down at her clipboard. "She is asking for you." Ethan looked stunned. "Me?" The nurse nodded once. Ethan followed her down the quiet hallway feeling more nervous than he had before billion-dollar negotiations or international acquisitions. Because none of those things ever carried the possibility of forgiveness. When he stepped inside the softly lit hospital room, Claire looked impossibly small against the white pillows and pale blue blankets. Her blonde hair rested loosely around tired eyes, and one hand remained protectively over her stomach even while sleeping lightly. But the moment she saw Ethan enter, she tried sitting up slightly. "Hey," Ethan whispered immediately. "Do not move too fast." Claire gave a faint tired smile. "You stayed." Ethan looked at her like the answer should have been obvious. "Of course I stayed." Silence settled softly between them while rain tapped against the hospital windows. For once there were no cameras, no investors, no ballroom whispers. Just two exhausted people sitting inside the ruins of choices they could never undo. Ethan moved closer slowly until he stood beside her bed. "Claire," he said quietly, "I do not know how to fix any of this." Claire looked down at the blanket for a moment before answering softly. "Some things cannot be fixed." The honesty hurt because it was true. Ethan swallowed hard. "But I want to try." Claire finally looked up at him again, and Ethan realized something heartbreaking in that moment. She still loved him a little. Not enough to trust him. Not enough to forget. But enough that the pain still existed. Ethan carefully sat beside her bed. "I spent 2 years thinking success meant winning," he admitted quietly. "More money. Bigger deals. More headlines." He laughed softly at himself. "Then tonight I saw you cleaning tables while carrying our daughter and realized I have never actually felt poorer in my life." Claire's eyes filled with tears again, though she smiled faintly through them. Ethan looked toward her stomach carefully. "Can I?" Claire hesitated only briefly before nodding once. Ethan placed a trembling hand gently against the blanket covering her stomach. For several seconds nothing happened. Then suddenly a tiny kick pressed back against his palm. Ethan froze completely. The room disappeared around him again. Not from shock this time. From love. Pure and terrifying and overwhelming love. His daughter. Claire watched his face carefully while tears slipped silently down his cheeks before he could stop them. Ethan laughed shakily through the emotion. "She kicks hard." Claire smiled softly. "Only when she is stubborn." Ethan looked up at her then, really looked at her, and realized the woman beside him had survived betrayal, loneliness, debt, exhaustion, and fear without losing her kindness. That was strength no billionaire empire could ever buy. A soft knock interrupted the moment, as Daniel Mercer stepped carefully into the room holding a folder beneath one arm. Ethan immediately straightened slightly. "What is it?" Daniel hesitated before answering. "The board voted unanimously tonight." Ethan frowned. "For what?" Daniel looked directly at him. "Temporary removal of Vanessa Sinclair from all executive authority pending federal investigation." Claire lowered her eyes quietly while Ethan simply nodded once. Somehow the news felt strangely empty now. Daniel continued carefully. "There is something else." Ethan waited silently. Daniel opened the folder slowly. "The board also reviewed the original Sterling Ventures Incorporation documents recovered during the audit." Ethan's stomach tightened immediately. He already knew where this was going. Daniel looked toward Claire respectfully before speaking the final sentence. "Effective immediately, the board voted to restore Claire Bennett's original ownership shares in the company." Claire looked completely stunned. Ethan just stared at her quietly while the weight of it settled across the room. The woman everyone dismissed as a pregnant waitress cleaning tables now legally owned part of the empire she helped create. Claire looked overwhelmed. "I never wanted revenge," she whispered softly. Ethan shook his head immediately. "I know." Rain continued tapping against the hospital windows while Manhattan lights shimmered softly beyond the glass. And for the first time in years, Ethan Crawford finally understood something success never taught him. Some men lose millions and recover by morning. But some men almost lose the woman who believed in them before the world ever did. And that kind of loss changes a person forever.